Yeah, we're going to get that going. Let's get that up. What is up, everybody? Let's get this show going there. Let's get
I feel like I want to say I'm on the podcast, yeah.
I'm on the podcast.
The
well, welcome, everybody. We're letting this load up for a quick second here. Let's see who wants to join the party. I'm with my man. Now, when you introduce yourself, do you say your middle name?
I don't. I just do it in written form because my parents named me after a cowboy actor.
That was definitely going to be one of my questions today. So I'm here with my man, Jeremy Slate. We're going to let this queue up for a minute. Make sure it is streaming across all of your favorite platforms. There we go. Yeah, it's going. And we'll see who's joining the party. Yeah, it's been weird, man. It's been an up and down ride for me on the live.
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting a ton of effort in. I'm putting out a lot of shows, really trying to build the community element too. And it's just been an up and down with the audience size. You know, it's a lot to do with LinkedIn exposure. And I'm doing a ton of promos. I mean, I put so much effort into, you know, curating. I don't know if you've been kind of following along. I've been putting a lot of effort in curating like really good guests, like trying to have conversations. Yesterday, we had a tremendous conversation around prison reform, which was amazing. But I get a lot of magic in my replays, man. That's where I find my action. Tons of conversation afterwards. And I think I had this conversation with somebody. I'm curious to get your point of view. As you mentioned before we went live, having a consistent time so people know when to tune in. And you were talking about your Saturday morning show.
I've been doing 10:30 every Saturday for the last like 4 weeks. And then we did throw an extra one in on Sunday. And and I'm always like refreshing and checking the live views while we're on it. And like I think last week we had 250 live. We had 300 the week before. And I'm finding that like a lot of I'm not a professional at this, by the way. So it's like, you know, like we had no format, which is my friend Joe and I just show up every week and just
riffing,
shoot the shit. And you know, like we've had a really good number of people coming back, telling other people. And we've run like pretty much no promotion for it. And we just really make sure like we're engaging with people in the chat. And I think because of that, that's helped to like push more people in.
Yeah. And I think it's also a testament to one of your core principles. And you and I connected, I'll tell the whole story a while back about building the community early on. Right. And I think that's really important with any podcast. And I am very open with admitting one of my mistakes. I've been doing this, you know, you and I connected right when I started to put out my podcast, which was February of 2019. And at this point, I am approaching 100 shows, man. And those are just great podcasts. Yeah.
And most people didn't make it past 20, man. So 100's a big number. Way to go. And
thank you, man. And I don't have to tell you this, but it is so much work. And we'll get into that too. Like the amount of work that goes into it and figuring out your process and everything. But one of the things that I did not do early, and I use the analogy, right, of a plumber having a broken toilet in their house, right? I knew what to do. I knew everything I needed to do to build this thing, but I didn't put the effort required to build that community from the beginning. Right. I just kept putting shows out. I did my promotions, but I really didn't do a good enough job. And I can make excuses all day long, man. Right. I can make excuses. I was busy. I did this, I did that, but I didn't do it. So I'm coming to that party late. And it wasn't until I'd say right about when I was in my mid 40s and I started booking some guests that were just like, started to push it to the next level. Dave Meltzer, Heather Monahan, Claude Silver. I started to really up the guests, not like, because all my guests are awesome. I don't want to put any guests down, but we're talking about guests that have bigger followings.
Yeah.
And a little bit more panache out there and exposure in the marketplace. And that's when I really started to put a lot more time into building the audience, and the results really started to show. The downloads increased, the engagement increased. And then we shift gears to the live show. You know, I got my live in November. When did you get your LinkedIn Live?
I don't know. I didn't even apply for it. I just had it one day, and I don't know how I'm like, oh, cool, I could do LinkedIn Live. Maybe I'll do it at some point. It looks like it takes a lot of extra work. I'm not going to do it. And then one day my friend was like, hey, I want to do an interview. And I was kind of like, well, I got my podcast scheduled for the next 60 days. I don't really want to do another interview right now. I'm like, let's do a LinkedIn Live. I don't know how to do it. I'll figure it out. We'll
figure it out. Well, it's crazy. So I applied for LinkedIn Live in September, and then I went away on a trip right around Thanksgiving, and I came back, and it's my first time logging onto LinkedIn, and I see a little red dot on my desktop on the left side of it. It says, you have LinkedIn Live. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, Mazel Tov. Now what do I do? I'm like, I had no idea what to do. I'm not a streamer, right? I have my podcast, and I had to like ask people, I'm like, how do you do this? And they talked about getting the third-party app, and I'm like, what the hell is this crap? And I think, oh, here's my barbecue. Look, we're having a barbecue delivery. Look, these guys are delivering the barbecue out the window. You can see them.
Nice.
Yeah, real-time barbecue delivery.
Mazel tov, it's a barbecue.
I know, it's a barbecue. I'm really excited about that. But let's rewind a little bit. Let's kick things off. And it's crazy. So I say, welcome everybody to the podcast live. Today is the 8th day of May in the year 2020. I've been doing these live streams since March 11th. And I say the date the same way, kind of as a timestamp, a little bit of a time capsule. Every day is kind of blending together. I think the weather's just getting nicer and nicer.
This is the longest week ever, man. There's like 180 days in this week.
It's absolutely insane, man. So I'm with my man, Jeremy Slate, somebody that I hold in the highest regard as far as a podcaster, a LinkedIner, I guess we could call it that too, but somebody who really is a master of his craft. I mean, he really understands the art of podcasting, and we'll call it the science if we're going to talk about it from the, technical side as well, because there's so much to it. And somebody that I've learned a lot from. His approach, the way he promotes his show. So kudos to you, brother, and I certainly appreciate that.
Grateful
so
for you.
If you wouldn't mind, some of my guests, all 7 of them that are on here right now, we're going to build that up, hopefully.
7 of them, but we're up to 17 total views. So there's people that are checking it out that the viewers are not picking up, man.
And that's something too that I always talk about too. Like I go back and I had one yesterday, man. I mean, I'm up to over 1,000 views on my chat yesterday around prison reform, which was absolutely incredible. The power's in the replay because a lot of people are. I mean, I want people to come and engage. But back to you. Give everyone a quick intro of who you are and what you do best, my man.
Yeah, so I have a top-rated podcast called The Create Your Own Life Show. We're over 2.5 million downloads. 700 episodes. So I've gotten to do this a lot. And I just posted something about this yesterday. I feel like the biggest personal gift I've gotten from being a podcast host is I feel like I'm able to take a lot of seemingly unrelated things that I'm interviewing that person about, make them into a story arc and kind of unite the principle. And I think that's a lot of what being a podcaster is being a storyteller. I also run a PR agency called Command Your Brand, and we are a boutique PR firm for the podcast space. And we really help to get people hooked on some of the most top rated shows out there. And it's not where I started. My master's degree is in early Roman Empire propaganda, not a very applicable skill in the world of like.
Or how do you even think about monetizing that coming out of school, which is a crazy.
Oh, dude, I'm gonna monetize that by getting a substitute teacher job in private school, which eventually became a full-time teacher job. And I wanted to blow my brains out after like kind of the first year of doing it, because they put you in a room of 40 kids and they say good luck.
I can't even imagine.
So then in 2012, my mom ended up having actually a really bad stroke, and it kind of sent me for a whirlwind because it made me look at like life and like, what does this mean? I'd had knee surgery at 19 and they messed up my anesthesia and I got last rites. And,
oh man.
And it didn't change my life. And it was when almost losing my mom, like really made a big deal for me. So I went through like, and I'm sure people have had this happen to them, like 27 different business ideas that didn't work, ending up with the crescendo of trying to sell products on Amazon and leaving get my product for free promo code on my listing. So I lost all of my products in 10 minutes. So that was kind of the end of that business. Started podcast as a hobby, took off, and it kind of became everything we're doing now, man.
That's insane too. Let's take it back to your first podcast, man.
Yeah.
And I always like to, because you and I talk about it too. A good podcast host makes a great podcast guest. And I love coming on people's shows because I know I'm going to bring the energy, I'm going to bring the thunder. But let's take it back to that first show. Talk to me about the impetus. What was like that drive and said, you know what, I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to try this podcasting thing. Let's go to episode 1 of your first ever podcast.
Well, let's go back to episode 1 of the podcast that I tried to create before I created my current podcast, which was trash.
version 1.0 of whatever the hell you were starting, man.
Oh, I love podcasts forever. I've listened to this show called the No Agenda Show for the last like 10 years where they just make fun of the news. It's great. So like I've been a podcast listener and I'm like, oh, this is easy. I can do it. And I started a show and it turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. So I'm like, all right, well, how do you like find people to interview? So I called my friend Chris that's like bringing solar energy to Africa. I'm like, I'm starting a podcast. I've written down like 50 questions. I'm going to show up at your house and I'm going to interview you. We don't have any mics. This is going to be fun. So, kudos to him because he did a great job. I feel like I did a crappy job as an interviewer. It sounded like we were inside of a garbage can doing this interview. Like,
where'd you record it?
His office, but like I didn't realize like, hey, it's better if the computer's closer to you. Hey, like microphones would be great. So we had no miking.
So you just used your onboard mic that was on the computer.
Oh, dude, it was so bad. It was so bad. So then I put it out and, the interview ended up being decent because we did some stuff in post-production. But like most of those interviews were rough. And I tried to like do some other like solo episodes of like life coachy type stuff when I had no life experience. So it was just bad. I had like 100 downloads in 2.5 months. So I ended up quitting the thing. And it took another 4 months before I started my current show, which is Create Your Own Life. And I was like, all right, well, I think the thing I did differently is I could treat this as being a professional.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, what would a professional do? Well, they'd have good equipment. They would know what they're doing. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go take a course. I didn't just take one course, Adam. I'm like, let me take 4. And 4 ended up being the reason that I almost didn't start, because I always needed more information to do something.
Interesting.
And
it was almost too much knowledge. It was almost too much. It was information overload, of course.
And my wife's like, all right, are you going to like take another course? Are you going to do this thing? And you're going to do something else? Are you going to like get a job? Because like, you're really like kind of bringing us down. So I ended up, starting my current show, and, we had 10,000 listens in our first 30 days, man.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I love it. It's a great story too. And there's so many podcasts out there, and it's really hard to stand out. For me, my purpose was, when I created my show, I said, I have such a tremendous network, right? Like, and they use a cliche, your network is your net worth, but it really is for me. I mean, every relationship, every business, every dollar I make is predicated on all those relationships I've had for 20 plus years. It's something I preach in all my content as well. And I said, wow, I talk to people all day long for a living. I'm a freaking recruiter. This is what I do. I mean, I literally interview people all day long. Why don't I put this live? Why don't I start to bring in people in my network? And that's what I did. And the show is focused around career journeys. It's around HR, talent acquisition, and all that. And then the show, kind of took a life of its own, where I'm like somewhere in like the 20s, 30s range of the show. I started to bring in guests that had really interesting life stories, and their career wove into that. And I found that started to expand my audience. It started to expand my reach. Because the initial show, and it's cool to have a very niche show, right? There's people that literally talk about
it's the best way to do it, man. It's the best way to start is niche.
Right. I started niche, and then now going wide. Like tomorrow, I'm dropping an episode with Marcus Ogden, a former NFL athlete.
Marcus is awesome. He's a good dude.
He's got a great story too. I have an Olympic guy. I have Ty Washington coming up. Hakeem Valley's coming up. Like, I'm really starting to expand the content there. And with expanding the content, I'm talking to a broader audience. And their numbers are growing. But what I found for me, man, a couple of things, and especially during this pandemic, all the content that I'm doing is keeping me sane.
Yeah.
And it's keeping me connected, right? Like, how do you use your podcast to keep you connected, your finger on the pulse of what's happening?
Well, that's a good question. I will say right now we're hiring too. So I've been doing a ton of interviews the last week, and we're doing all of our second interviews today. So it's an interesting process there. But in terms of like using my podcast to keep me sane, wow. I have never really looked at it as a thing for me. Like, sure, there's some people I really want to talk to, and that's amazing. But I'm really looking at it as like, how can I give some people some stability right now? Right. Because like they need certain types of information. They need advice from certain types of people. So, maybe it's caused me to look at a different type of guests that I wouldn't typically look at.
Interesting.
Like I just interviewed one of the founders of one of the top bourbon making companies in the country.
Who's that?
And, Tom Bullett's his name. Really, really cool guy. Bullet Bourbon. And we talked about like a lot of the adversity he's been through, because he's had a ton. Because I think right now the thing people need to hear the most are stories of adversity. So I'm trying to meet people where they're at, and I think that's kind of the biggest help that they can get right now. I haven't really been thinking about myself and keeping myself sane, because like, honestly, like, we've still had business as usual, because we've pretty much had a distributed team anyway. You know what I mean? So like, our team's all over the country anyway.
You want to see something great? Let's see if this is going to work. This is Tom Bullett's desk.
Hey, Bullet Bourbon, man.
I was there last year. I was in Shively, Kentucky, right outside of I was right over there, man. And they're like, that's his real desk. I'm like, there's no way that's his real desk. And I started to like literally sit there, and like, I wasn't poking around. I wasn't opening drawers or anything, but there was shit on his desk. It was a real work desk, right? That's Tom Bullett's desk right there. So fun little fact there. Have you done the Kentucky distillery tour? Have you done the bourbon tour?
I've never been to Kentucky. I know my dad did the Jack Daniels tour a couple years ago, and I know when my family goes to Ireland, we do distillery tours all the time, but I've never been to Kentucky.
Dude, are you a bourbon guy?
So I'm actually a Sam Adams beer guy. I don't drink a ton. But so we went to the Sam Adams factory a few years ago for my 30th birthday, which is pretty awesome. But believe it or not, I like not as much bourbon, it's more whiskey. And I like more of the Scotch type whiskey, which is a little bit harsher on the palate, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, we did that trip last year for my buddy's 40th, and well, that's a whole separate interview, man. That's a nighttime interview. There's a lot of crazy shit that went down on that trip. But podcasting, I find it does a lot of things for me too, besides keeping me sane, right? It hones my craft of speaking. And I think a good podcast host, and you have to, we're quick on our feet. There's no prep for the,
absolutely.
I don't do any prep for my live show. I don't do any prep at all for the live show, because 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a guest that I have a rapport with, or someone like yourself where we spoke before, we're in the same field. I know that we could kind of riff too. But on the other side of my podcast, I do a lot of preparation for that, because I do something that you do. I want to take my listeners on a story arc.
Yeah.
Right. I want to take them on a journey. And I also want to make sure that I'm hitting on all those key points of my guest's career, their story. And I want to kind of, pepper into what they're promoting or what they want to get out there, because I think that's why they're coming on your show too. And I don't think a lot of hosts do that well. And
I would agree with that.
And I think you could hear it clearly. Everyone, like, it's like real estate. Like everyone,
it's a balance though, right? Because you can prepare way too much, like I did in the beginning, and that was really rough for the person. But then you need to prepare enough so it's not weird. Like I interviewed Kelly Earnhardt not too long ago. She was the daughter of the late Dale Earnhardt, and I actually read her book for the interview because I wanted to have some insight into her life. And she actually talks quite a bit in the book about how her relationship with her dad wasn't great, and that actually affected a lot of what she had done. Had I done the interview without knowing that, like, hey, I'm a super big fan of your dad, like that could have not went well. There's just some things you have to know with balance.
Yeah. And that's interesting too. You talk about over preparation, and I worked with, I was pretty lucky. So about 10 episodes into my show, and I was kind of doing my own kind of research, and I didn't have a script or anything. I had a couple of questions, and it was a little bit formulaic. And I found out that one of my dear friends is actually a professional media host. She works with Grant Cardone, other types like that too, where she works like A-list media, PR. Like,
you're talking about Raina, are you?
Huh? No, Raina Friedman Watts?
Yeah.
No, Raina's one of my good friends too, and we're super connected. No, my friend Janny. And we spent, I'd probably say it was close to 10 hours over the course of 2 weeks coaching, getting my scripting down, getting my intro, like getting all my shit together. And now it's formulaic for me, where I don't read necessarily question by question, but at least I have those points that I want to hit. And if I know I'm hitting them, I'm taking the story on, I'm taking the listeners on that. And I've gotten some tremendous feedback, and I don't want to pat my own back, but like, once, as a podcast host, I say podcast host, when your guests come back and they compliment you on your interview style and how you did it, you're doing something right.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that. Cause a good example of that is yesterday I interviewed Mitzi Perdue. And she's the widow of the late Frank Perdue.
Wow.
But here's the thing. I found out about her story. The more research I did is her dad was the co-founder of the Sheraton hotel line. So like,
interesting.
She had these two story arcs,
two lives.
Seemingly disrelated. And you have to figure out how to unite them and like kind of make the whole thing make sense and bring it back around. So I found like the uniting principles in both of them. You bring it back around, and she goes, I don't know how in 30 minutes you took two stories that are seemingly unrelated, relate them, and make this make sense. So like you make a great experience for that guest too, man. Just like you're saying.
And it's about not being selfish as a host. I mean, I've been on guest shows where literally the host will rant and talk so much about themselves and their agenda. And you sit back and you're like, why'd you even have me on the show? Why am I even here? So I got some feedback, probably in the early 40s of my shows too. And somebody that I trust deeply as a mentor said, listen, I love your show. You're doing a great job, but you're talking a little too much and you're not letting the guests shine. And I took that feedback to heart, and I made a real conscious effort when I do my show to get the question out there, set it up for the guest, and just sit back and take that story. Yeah. And that changed the direction of the show big time.
You know what's funny though is I feel like I was on the other side of that. Like I didn't talk enough because I'm not like the most social person out there. You see me in public, I might be like, "Hi." I'm not gonna like run over and like talk to you a lot just because I'm a pretty quiet person. But like I did my first interviews. I interviewed a guy, Wayne Roots, his name. He invests in a whole bunch of like casinos and stuff like that. And I interviewed him, and I like asked him one question, then he talked for 40 minutes. So then like my dad actually listened to the interview, and he goes, wow, that was a great monologue. What did he pay you for that? And I had to kind of learn when to steer a guest, when to interrupt, and when to kind of run that differently because I was on the other side of it. You know what I mean?
That's a big technique too. And I got complimented by Dave Meltzer because I interrupted him. He goes, you're one of the few people that had the balls to interrupt me, and you did it in a very tactful, strategic way.
Yeah.
And I told him, I go, that took practice because sometimes Meltzer's great, but he'll go. If you don't stop that dude, like he'll just keep on rambling. But there's also a time, and you know this well, there's a feel to podcasting, right? There's a feel to listening to the story and the flow of the show where sometimes a guest is just in it, right? They're in it and they're just telling a great story and you don't want to cut it off, but you also have to know when that end comes, how you're going to play off of that. And maybe when you come out of that, there's going to be different questions than you even thought of. Like I'm always kind of taking notes during the show.
I was going to say, it's the simple thing of having this thing next to you. Cause I don't know if you found this, man, but I find that like somebody's telling a really good story and I have my follow-up. If I'm trying to remember my follow-up, I stop listening to them.
Right.
Cause like, here's the thing, like you need to get that out of your head and just put it on paper and then just continue to listen. Because like you're saying, like you need to steer them, but you also need to know when to cut them off and then when to bring that follow-up back around. Because I've found that a lot of my follow-ups actually get me better answers than the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one. So I have a couple of questions for you, right? So I think I'm going in the right direction. I love what I'm doing. I will put it out there. I am on the verge of booking 2 guests that I'm going to call them A-list guests. One is a prominent politician. The other one is someone pretty prominent. Yeah, imagine that. Imagine literally, Trump comes on my little show. I mean, it would be oh God. And I'm feeling more confident. I'm building this up and everything, man. But like, I get, I feel good and I want to like keep the quality level of my guests at a certain point. And I'm not trying to be insulting to anybody, but like I get reached out to a lot lately these days. And I think it's a testament to a show being successful, right? A lot of PR people, a lot of individuals. How do you tell somebody no? How do you tell somebody, well, 2 things. You probably get cold pitched all day long. People probably don't even take a second to acknowledge why they should be on your show, why they like your show. They just go me. Like, how do you handle this? How do you say no to people? I'd love to hear your approach.
Oh, this is rough, man. Cause I'm like somewhere in the middle.
This is real talk, man. Let's talk about it.
No, it's like, cause like I'm somewhere in the middle. Cause like our business is we get people on shows. So like there's half of me that's like, so my team always like hates talking to me about guests because I'm like a nitpicky pain in the ass. And they're always like, oh, well, what does your perfect guest look like? Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's me. Well, I'm like, no, I'm looking for blah. I'm looking for blah. So I don't know, man. Like, it's like, I get a lot of, I try to be kind to people, first of all, when it's not right.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because
always.
You don't want to insult them. And I wouldn't want that to happen to me.
And they could also be a listener. You don't want to lose a listener, a subscriber.
Yeah. So there's that part of it. But at the same time, I also need to make sure, because there's what I'm giving my audience, but also at the same time, I know, like I said that it's not about me, but there's also, I have to have an interest so that I can get a great interview. You know what I mean? So there's also that part of it as well. Like I have to be interested in the thread.
Of course.
So like,
otherwise you'll be bored.
Yeah. So like Bullet was pitched to me and I'm like, oh, this sounds cool. So I was interested in that. And I guess for me, the thing that I would typically say no to is, so I'm a business coach. I help other business coaches, you know what I mean? Like somebody that's exactly the same as every other person out there. And because I feel like there's people that don't really concentrate on, well, this is my differentiation point. This is more about my story, more about my life experience. And I can make that into a great interview then, even if you're not well known. Like I had a guy that he worked with like some solar energy company. I don't remember which one. And he was like their top sales guy ever. And nobody heard of him. He'd never been on a podcast. He was a great interview. And because he'd never been on a podcast before, he was really willing to share it with his audience, and his company even shared it. So it's like finding that really unique story. You know what I mean? That's the thing.
Yeah. And I find that too, because if someone, and I don't discriminate if someone doesn't have a huge following, I don't discriminate because I'm about the story, man. If someone, exactly to your point, man, because you could hear a story like, that's something that I want to talk about. That's something that's interesting, but how do you say no to somebody? Like,
it's like
I send you a message. It's not right. I'm getting a little pushy. I'm not understanding why this shouldn't be a slam dunk. I mean, there's some people that really think that, it's you owe them something.
Yeah. So it depends too, because not every situation is the same, right? Like I might say, hey, this isn't a fit right now. Or I might say, hey, this isn't a fit. Or I've had other people. I will say there was one situation where a publicist was pitching me and they were using Boomerang. And I don't know if their Boomerang was broken or what, but I said no 6 times and I got the email the 7th time where I finally like found the phone number and called the office. I'm like, dude, stop freaking doing this. I'm annoyed as hell. So I try to say no in the nicest way possible, like to not invalidate that person. So it's tough to say this is how I handle it every single time because it's a case by case basis, man.
That's very
Somebody may pitch me and I say, hey, this isn't a fit for me, but like, hey, my good friend Tim Allison, he wants to screw the naysayers, man, and you're a great fit for his show. So at the same time, I'm thinking with like, where is this person at in their journey? What kind of help do they need? Is this a fit for me, or how can I help them? You know what I mean?
And you hit something really cool, and that's something that I do as well too. I turn it into teachable moments from a coaching perspective, right? And I figure out tactful ways to tell people about their approach, right? And it's spinning it around and saying and giving them actionable advice, actionable insight. Or sometimes I also
I
find
haven't really done that because I feel like personally I wouldn't receive that well, so I wouldn't want
like, who are you to tell me this shit?
Yeah, so it's like
why are you the authority here?
Yeah, so I wouldn't want to do that. Just
it's
I know
more subtle.
Yeah, personally, I wouldn't receive it well.
Right. No, it's interesting too. And then a lot of times I'm sure, when you get to a podcast of your level, right, you're getting, it's mostly PR people and reps and, assistants as well too. And they're the middleman, right? So you have to kind of play that message a little bit differently, but in the same breath too, they're probably also used to getting like hard nosed more than the guests themselves.
And honestly, for that point, a lot of times they're actually easier to work with because I have relationships with a ton of them and they don't take it personally because I've had a few of their guests here or there and they're going to try. And if they say no, they say no.
That's their job. I mean, they're getting paid on placements. I mean, you have a PR agency as well too. Let's talk a little bit about audience growth. And I'll take my show and I mentioned it before, those first 20 episodes, it was in like, it was like I was getting to 100. I was so happy when I got to 100 downloads, and then I finally hit a 500 one. And then when I hit my first 1,000 download one, which was close to episode 50, that's when things really took off for me, right? And I like had that, but that comes with like repetition and that comes with practice and building the audience. But like, what are some of the fundamentals? Because I think so many people get frustrated. Right. Unless you're a celebrity. And I saw you post about this the other day. I think it was you, right? Like, unless you're coming and you're like a John Legend, I'm just throwing a name out there, and you're starting a podcast with a built-in audience, you're a Joe Schmo off the street like me, or, like you, right? Like, I mean, you started years ago, but like, how do you build an audience the right way? How do you build momentum? What are some of these tips and practices?
Yeah. Well, I guess just real quick too. I just let you know in 15 minutes we have a second interview. So just because we're hiring right now.
We're gonna bring it down soon. I got to go check out my new grill anyway.
We're hiring, which is super exciting. But I'll say to that point, it's about the amount of action you're willing to take up front, man. Like it really is, because I was nobody, man. Like I literally I failed at everything I tried. So like I had no Facebook following, I had no Twitter following, no Instagram following. So I looked at like what I did have. And I had spent a lot of time in the fitness world. Like I was a competitive powerlifter. I had some stuff I had done there. So I had a lot of fitness connections on LinkedIn, most of which I've actually weeded through quite a few of now because not all of them are relevant to like where I'm going now. But I didn't know that automation was a thing. So I manually sent like, 1,000 LinkedIn messages to people, like telling them, hey, subscribe to my show, because the number one thing that ranks a podcast is the number of subscribers you can get in a 24-hour period in ratio to your current number of subscribers. So that as that number goes up, it's good. So I knew that off the bat. So I pushed as many people as I could to subscribe, and I actually had directions on how to do it. And then also reviews. So in that first week, I got 60 reviews. Now reviews don't rank you, but it makes it easier to win the subscribe because somebody says, okay, this is legit. They've got, a high number of reviews. This is a good number of reviews. So that's why even when we're looking at ranking podcasts, we're looking at reviews because a high number is an indicator of good audience growth. But
legitimate reviews, because there's a lot. I get pitched all day from like across the pond. We'll just call them like places across the world where they're literally going to manufacture reviews. I'm like, my audience will see right through some BS review there, man.
And that's going to remove them anyway. They've been pretty good about that.
Yeah, and I told these people, I go, that's not the way I operate, man. I want people who really listen to the show to give a review.
Yeah, so like honestly, I was pushing as many subscribers as I can get, and that's something I've constantly done. And another thing that I've done is we've ran some contests to keep the reviews going, or keep the subscribes going. Because we go to a lot of events. You get a lot of free books at events because that's how people pitch their book to the bestseller. Hey, buy 10,000 copies of my book. So every time you go to an event, you get all these books. So I have like 27 copies of Ask Gary V. So every time, every month we run a contest. Like, hey, this is the book we're giving away this month. The first person to subscribe and get first person to review and get 5 other people to do it and send it back to me or whatever. So like you try to find ways to keep engaging, and like you have to know your stats, man. Subscribes is number one.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm working on too. And it's also a lot of hand-to-hand combat. And what I mean is it's engaging with people like in your LinkedIn, on your Facebook. I just started a Facebook group last week. I just started my YouTube page. I'm late to the game, but I'm doing all those things that I need to do. Yeah. Right. Because I'm in it for the long haul. I got some great guests coming up, and I really need to build that audience. And I love that idea of a contest. I think I'm gonna steal that idea and think
it's
about
fun, man, because
this stuff. I got plenty of cool stuff to give away.
Probably go to as many events as I do, where the event organizer had to buy like a stupid number of books. You know what I mean?
They're just books just piled up there too.
Dude,
right?
I got like stacks of the School of Greatness, stacks of Ask Gary V. I haven't bought them. People just give them to you at events.
Yeah, I'm sure I could get. I'm looking here. I got Brendan Steiner, Dave Meltzer. I'm looking up on my bookshelf right behind me over there. Heather Monahan. I got some books up there. I got 5 Gary V books up there. Those are all my special Gary V books too. But it's definitely a good idea. But going back to it, like I spend a lot of time in the DMs. I spend a lot of time when people engage when they comment on a particular show. I go back and I recognize them and I acknowledge them, and that takes time, man.
Well, do you then too, when somebody, like, I guess when it's on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, like, because the thing that I do, hey, that is so awesome, I appreciate that feedback. Would you mind doing a review for us? If you check out this short link, if you go to ratethispodcast.com/CYOL, it'll give you the directions and actually take you directly to Apple Podcasts to do it. Like, you always want to try and bring that back around, because if they are excited, they are going to be more willing to help you. And we've gained a lot of reviews and subscribes that way of people that like the show and maybe weren't a subscriber or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, that's a mission I'm on right now. Like, I have a little bit of bandwidth, right? It's about growing the show. And I look back on it too. I was so busy when I had this show out that I didn't make the time to do it right. And listen, would my show be twice as popular? Would it be 3 times, 4 times if I went back, if I did that from the beginning? Who knows? But it's better late than ever, right? So I know you're busy. I know you got other stuff coming on. So I want to wrap this up. I certainly appreciate you coming on here.
On the podcast, yeah.
It's on the podcast. Yeah, give me one professional silver lining and one personal silver lining that you've experienced over this last 8 weeks of, quarantine and, all this craziness that's going on out there.
Well, I guess personal, I've spent a ton more time with my daughter. We have a 1.5-year-old daughter.
Awesome.
And I know my mother-in-law has a chiropractic office, which my wife helps her with a few days a week. So, like, they're still open because they're an essential business. So because of that, like, I've kind of been working while also, being daddy daycare at the same time and getting a lot more time to play with her. So what I've tried to do is prioritize on getting stuff done earlier so I can spend more time with her and do more stuff with her. And that's been a lot more fun and rewarding there. On the business side, we're still growing, man. We're still pushing the ball forward. We've, made our hiring process even better, which has been really exciting. So we've added like some more personality tests.
That's awesome, man.
So we know that we're getting the right people and the right fits. So that's been great. And I guess another personal win, man, I got in the mail a free bottle of Bullet Bourbon, which was awesome. So we had a lot of good stuff going, man.
Can you help me get Tom Bullitt on my show?
Yeah, I'll connect you to his guy. He's a really good dude.
I am I don't know. Did he send you Bullet 10?
Just the orange label.
I mean, I will literally I
asked him, what's your favorite one? He goes, dude, it's like picking your favorite kid. I can't do it.
Oh my God. I would love nothing more to have Tom Bullitt on my show. Well, Jeremy Ryan Slate, I appreciate you making some time this morning to join the podcast live. To everyone kind of checking us out either now or later, because I know we get a ton of laters coming on there. And I'll be hopping on with you later when we get this thing posted up. I appreciate everybody. We will wrap the week up. Jeremy, where could folks find you? Where could they connect you? Where could they learn more, my man?
Yeah. Personal brand side is over at jeremyryanslate.com. If they want to find out more about our company and see how we may be able to help them, I put together a free training, which you can go to commandyourbrand.com/free training.
And it's awesome. I've checked that out too. I did that early on. And it definitely helped me a lot too. Jeremy, I appreciate you, my man. Everyone, thank you for joining us this week. I have another jam-packed, on Monday, we're coming at you with Steve Noodleberg. We're going to do a live full podcast recording. And I've been doing this once a week, man, which is getting really good results, where I pull back the curtain and I do a podcast live streaming. Which is pretty awesome, and I get a lot of cool feedback. They're like, "Wow, that's really interesting to see," and I show them the warm up too, like, so they get to see the conversation before I hit the record button, and they're like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," right? Like, I've gone back and forth with Steve a bit, but we haven't talked on the phone, so that initial few minutes is going to be our intro chat. It's going to be like our warm up to it too, and people are like, "That's pretty cool stuff." So, just trying, experimenting. I'm going to do a late night live show next week. I'm going to dress up like Jimmy Kimmel and put a desk in front of me. I don't know. You got to keep it fresh, right? You got to keep it fresh. All right, cool. Jeremy, I appreciate your time, and everyone watching, have a great weekend. Wash your hands. Be good to each other. Take care.
All right.
We are off.
Oh, awesome.